Ukraine has just dealt a severe blow to Russia. The heaviest blow within Russian territory in terms of losses of the entire war. Look at this.
Ukraine says it has hit over 40 Russian military aircraft in mass drone attack.
It was like a movie. Well, what can I say? If we had seen it in a movie, it would most likely have seemed like a crazy idea from the director of the moment. On Sunday, the 1st of June, Ukraine launched a massive drone strike against air bases in 5 regions of Russia, located in 5 different time zones at the same time. It is one of those macro operations that are given a name of their own, Spider's Web. But what is striking here is not the what, but the how. An operation that, according to Zelensky, they had been preparing for a year and a half, and which is extremely complex. This is a simply brilliant attack from a military point of view. According to the Ukrainian, they managed to sneak 117 suicide drones into Russia unnoticed, and launch them from just a few meters away from Russian air bases. And how? Well, they hid them under the roofs of prefabricated huts, which were opened remotely for the drones to take off. Some of them were mounted on trucks, and then in turn, these trucks were positioned in areas close to the military bases. And that's when the magic happened. Suddenly, the roofs of these trucks loaded with huts became real drone bases. One after the other, they began to take off under the gaze of Russians who had no idea what was going on. From gas station parking lots, from highway rest areas. In total, according to Ukrainian sources, 117 drones were used, each with its own remote pilot.
The most interesting thing, and we can already say this publicly, is that the office of our operation on Russian territory was located right next to the FSB, Federal Security Service of Russia, in one of their regions. Our most long-range operation, our people involved in preparing the operation were withdrawn from Russian territory in time.
Crazy, don't you think? But incredible as it may seem, the most significant thing about this attack is not the method, but the result. More than 40 aircraft destroyed or damaged, including a few A-50 spy planes, and Tupolev 95 and Tupolev 22 M3 strategic bombers. In fact, according to information provided by Ukraine, more than 1/3 of all Russian strategic cruise missile carrying aircraft have been destroyed. It is simply an appalling, devastating blow, estimated to have caused Russia to lose more than $7 billion in military hardware. But did you know what is the most curious thing of all? Well, each of the drones they have used probably cost no more than just a few $100s. Yeah, just as you heard. A few cheap drones may have destroyed more than 30% of Russia's strategic cruise missile bombers. The drones in Ukraine have radically changed everything. In fact, Sunday's attack was the most brilliant drone attack of the whole war. But behind this lethal weapon, there is a real and impressive strategy. Both Moscow and Kyiv have made extensive use of them, to the point that this conflict has led to such an advance in drone warfare technology that drones now pose a threat to all of Europe, a threat comparable even to missiles, especially for the countries on Europe's eastern flank, such as Poland, Finland, and the 3 Baltic states.
U.S. President Donald Trump said he is considering more sanctions on Moscow after Russia launched a barrage of 367 drones and missiles at Ukrainian cities overnight, including the capital Kyiv, in the largest aerial attack of the war so far.
And no, we're not here to tell you again how unwilling the Kremlin is to end this conflict, but why this is happening.
Drone warfare stalls progress on Ukraine's front line. Some 35 kilometers north of Kharkiv, with the Russian army at a distance, the soldiers of the 127th Brigade are waging electronic warfare. Over 3 years, artillery combat has given way to drone warfare. As a result, the front line is frozen. Ukrainian soldiers are buried in trenches, and rotations of personnel and medical evacuations have become extremely dangerous.
As you can see, between November 2022 and May 2025, the front lines have changed very little. In fact, from April 2024 to March 2025, the Russians have scraped together about 4,000 square kilometers, while the Ukrainians have liberated fewer than 100. But that difference, which sounds like a landslide, actually amounts to just 0.78% of Ukraine's total territory. By 2024 alone, at least 45,000 Russian soldiers have died for practically nothing, according to figures estimated by military sources. And in this fight for territory, drones are playing a crucial role. In fact, listen to what a Russian military blogger says about what this war has become.
The main reason for the lack of success remains the enemy's air dominance. Their reconnaissance drones are in the sky 24/7, and any move we make is immediately met with a massive drone wave. Russian infantry cannot leave their trenches. When they do, we simply lose troops without achieving anything.
Well, such is the success of the Ukrainian drone strategy that, as we mentioned before, they have just presented a new project called Drone Line, a project that may go far beyond Ukraine. It may signal an entire change in Europe's security architecture on the eastern border. Basically, the idea is to create create an annihilation belt that will initially be between 10 and 15 kilometers long. An invisible wall with permanent drone coverage to stop any Russian advance without human losses. Well, to kickstart the operation, Ukraine has put 4.6 billion hryvnias, that's about $110 million, on the table for the drone line project. And pay attention, because if all goes well, this annihilation zone is expected to stretch to 40 kilometers. Not only that, Kyiv has approved a budget of $2.6 billion in direct purchases of drones and autonomous vehicles for 2025 alone. And that's not even all. Ukraine is also betting heavily on military robots on the ground, which would operate in coordination with drones to create a real army without humans.
How Ukraine is replacing human soldiers with a robot army.
In March, Ukrainian officials announced plans to deploy 15,000 ground robots as early as 2025. In fact, the Ukrainian budget for producing and putting these unmanned ground vehicles into service has been multiplied, wait for it, by 60 times between the second half of 2024 and the first quarter of 2025. Come on, these guys are serious. If this works, can you imagine what the European countries bordering Russia and Belarus could do with their ever-increasing defense budgets? It seems pretty clear. If this combination of drones and ground robots works, and so far it looks good, it could be a turning point in how we understand European border security and warfare itself. And that's precisely why we had to ask some questions. How has Ukraine gone from welding chassis in a garage to producing millions of drones a year? What does the Kremlin have in mind to counter this? What should Europe learn from this strategy? Think about it for a moment. If a $400 quadcopter knocks out a $4 million T-90, could this be one of the formulas Europe needs to apply to deter Putin's hordes from any further invasion attempts? Well, let's find out.
Making a lethal swarm.
The postcard from the front is no longer measured in armored divisions, but in frames per second. In some sectors, the classic infantry has all but disappeared from the picture. Only pilots are left hiding miles away, flying swarms that hit any hotspot before a human even sticks his head out. As Moscow repeats the old meat grinder strategy, throwing entire companies of troops to their deaths, statistics rule. According to a New York Times report, in some sectors of the front, 8 out of 10 Russian soldiers are killed by drones. Drones that in many cases cost little more than a mid-range cell phone.
Ukraine is making FPV drones without Chinese parts and at lower cost.
In 2022, the Ukrainian military industry was little more than Soviet scrap, with $1 billion output. This year, it's aiming for $35 billion, and much of that is coming from startups that, before the invasion, were selling 3D printers or remote-controlled toys. It's an industry that has gone from 20,000 drones per month at the beginning of 2024 to a target of 375,000 per month by the end of this year. How on earth do they do it? By cutting as much dependency as possible.
We have made a breakthrough in the unmanned systems sector. More than 95% of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, currently used at the front are Ukrainian-made.
Just when Beijing was tightening export licenses, Kyiv decided that chassis, flight controllers, antennas, engines, radios, absolutely everything should be assembled in-house in a self-sufficient manner. In March, the first 1,100% Ukrainian FPV drones were released by the company Drone. The result? Nothing less than a base drone for $400, about $700 if it carries Odd Systems' new Kerbas 256 thermal camera. But the most impressive fact is not the cost, but the learning curve. And you will see, a clear example is this same Kerbas camera that we just mentioned. Most thermal cameras have automatic calibration, sometimes causing the image to freeze for several seconds. And you can get an idea of what this means in respect to a drone pilot. The Kerbas has been adapted to the needs of the battlefield. It does not freeze the image when recalibrating, and allows adjustments to be made in flight. When the customer's life is on the line, R&D soars ahead, and so on with an endless list of examples. Ukrainian industry has become one of the most adapted to the battlefield, and this is exactly what Europe needs to learn. They are even implementing functions with artificial intelligence in the aiming of drones for just a few tens of dollars extra. We're talking about a technology that is retrained every morning with tons of real clips. Every time a drone hits or misses, the algorithm learns, and the result is that the lethality gets a little better with each passing week. Now, does Putin really have absolutely nothing to go up against the Ukrainian military industry? Is there no weak point among the war entrepreneurs?
How Starlink keeps Ukraine's military online and ahead in battle.
Well, drone warfare doesn't just devour propellers, it requires batteries, explosives, and above all, an uninterrupted data channel. That highway is currently provided by Starlink, 7,000 satellites that keep pilots connected even with half of Ukraine in the dark. The problem is that the link is also the weak link. If Starlink goes down for 10 minutes, the drone line goes blind. And this is where the Russian response comes in. On the one hand, there is Kalinka, a program designed to locate the microwave beam coming up from each Starlink terminal. And there's its complement, Tobol, an electronic warfare system distributed across several stations that basically causes satellite interference. The objective is clear: to break the drone line by blinding the pilot before the drone. For the moment, yes. The brigades have diversified links with Maya radio networks, military 4G networks, and pre-programmed routes that allow the drones to accomplish their mission even if the link goes down. The question is, what can Europe learn from this? Well, to begin with, as well as betting on the mass production of low-cost drones to create swarms like the Ukrainian ones, it should bet massively on satellites. Europe has the technology and the money to create its own Starlink, and even to turn it into much more secure systems designed for dual civilian and military use. And take note, the foundation already exists. We have internet satellite companies such as the French Eutelsat, the SES in Luxembourg, and the European IRIS. The problem is that it could take quite a few years to reach Starlink's coverage and effectiveness figures. And this is precisely a point on which Europe must get its act together now. Put in money, resources, public and private R&D, whatever it takes, but it should be done, and soon. Remember what we were telling you a moment ago about Ukrainian self-sufficiency with drones? Well, that is crucial. The less you rely on foreign players for your own defense, the better. In fact, this has all been highlighted lately with controversies such as the alleged remote shutdown button on US F-35 fighters, a function that most likely does not exist, but the fear is there. What does exist, however, is the need to seek permission from third countries in order to use some weapon systems. Not only that, the United States could limit the operations of some of its weapons by limiting or cutting off maintenance, spare parts, or software upgrades. And to be honest, this is already a very big limitation for the defense of any country. What is really important is that all this proves, once again, that Ukraine is not just another war, but a laboratory where the defense of Europe is being decided. Whoever masters innovation in record time will control the battlefield. Those who depend on 5-year contracts, audit committees, and Brussels-style bureaucracy will be too late. And remember, so far we've mainly talked about drones and the satellite networks they need to be able to function in a conflict. But what comes next we have only seen in video games and movies. War robots have been around for years, but Western countries have focused on creating expensive, state-of-the-art machines, of which an army can barely afford a handful. Ukraine, on the other hand, is going further with low-cost combat robots, inspired by its low-cost drone strategy. And this may be another thing that Europe should copy at a moment's notice to make a difference. We are certain that what we're going to tell you next will surprise you, so stay tuned.
Low-cost Terminators.
If aerial swarms already seemed like science fiction, hold on to your seat, because the war in Ukraine is about to take an even more movie-like leap. The Ministry of Defense is not content with simply wallpapering the sky with quadcopters. For months now, it's been extending contracts for unmanned ground systems, real steel mules, capable of carrying ammunition, laying a fiber cable, evacuating the wounded, or firing directly into the ditch in front of them. They call it a robotic army. And we're not talking about prototypes in showcases, we're talking about machines that are rolling among the ruins of the front every night.
Flamethrower robots are now officially a part of Ukraine's war.
As we told you, Ukraine has become an open-air war laboratory, and this is just another example that could change the war. The goal is clear: at least 8,000 operational unmanned ground vehicles before the end of the year, and a curve that escalates to tens of thousands as soon as the production line is capable. Now, what exactly are they good for? Well, for everything that kills soldiers through attrition, carrying ammunition to a forward position under fire, recovering bodies without endangering rescuers, planting mines on a path being guarded by snipers, or directly spitting flares of fire. And take note, because once again, the key is artificial intelligence trained with very fresh data. Every kilometer a Scala robot travels, every pothole the Husky detects, every explosion a genome dodges adds lines to a dataset. A collection of real-time battle data that, to be frank, no Western test facility in controlled environments could gather in a decade. In fact, its engineers speak of perpetual beta. They update the software, send the patch via Starlink, and instantly the vehicles adjust the route or sharpen the silhouette detection algorithm. It's the same system as the low-cost drones we were talking about before, but transferred to the ground. And with a bonus feature, proximity sensors and 360-degree cameras also serve to train drones with hundreds, thousands of pieces of data, which are used to improve training and fine-tune algorithms. You see how revolutionary this could be if, with a larger budget and more technology, European countries jump in to adopt these technologies on a massive scale. Nevertheless, there's one question that needs to be asked. Will these robots solve Kyiv's staff shortage? Well, the reality is that no. No one in the general staff is under that illusion, but they could stretch out the resistance. A cargo robot replaces 4 infantrymen on a nighttime logistics mission. An armored personnel carrier prevents 2 medics from crossing a machine gun nest. A small robotic tank with a grenade launcher clears a bunker without going down into the trench. If we add hundreds of microjets, the balance of forces changes completely. And this could serve some armed forces, such as Germany's, which are having trouble recruiting soldiers, as a lifeline for reinforcing themselves despite their personnel limitations, a problem that is also common in several European armed forces.
Germany's army struggles to recruit new troops despite official push. Problems in recruiting soldiers in Spain. More soldiers leave than come in and 6% of the troops drop out.
But reducing the need for men and women in the field is not the only thing that would change with mass adoption of systems like these. Another thing the Ukrainians are achieving is saving lives of their own personnel by avoiding exposing their soldiers to certain risks. For example, a robot could patrol in stealth mode for hours or even days in extremely high-risk areas where flesh and blood soldiers would have to be under unimaginable stress. And this is not just our opinion. It is stated by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine itself.
Robotic systems can dramatically revolutionize the conduct of military operations. These systems reduce risks to personnel, provide greater speed and payload capacity, have lower visibility, and can be equipped with combat, engineering, or electronic warfare modules.
But we haven't even finished yet. As well as aerial drones and terrestrial robots, there are also sea drones. Systems that Ukraine has been operating for some time now in its defense against Russia, but which are adopting a spectacular level of sophistication while keeping costs very low. You see, Ukraine has no formal navy as of today. It doesn't have destroyer ships, anti-mine ships, or anything like that. So they had to get inventive and create a low-cost technological armada with maritime drones. A Ukrainian marine drone like the Majura costs between $200,000 and $275,000 each. There are drones that can strike up to 800 kilometers away from where they are launched. And yes, they're more expensive than an aerial or land-based drone, but still far short of what modern military frigates would cost, which can range from $700 million to $1.2 billion each. In other words, for the cost of one frigate, more than 3,000 of these devices could be purchased. You can imagine what that means. Now, how is this significant? Small European countries with smaller military budgets, such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, could become real sea urchins. If you dare to get close, you're going to get a puncture. And it's going to hurt. Do you see why these systems should be part of the European rearmament we are beginning to witness? And the result is plain to see. The Russian Black Sea Fleet operates with many limitations, far from the coast, and yet the casualty figures are impressive. Of the 80 or so ships that made up that Russian fleet before the war, it is estimated that Ukraine has already sunk or damaged almost 30. And this is a phenomenal success for a country without a navy.
Prior to the war, Russia was seen as the controlling maritime power in the Black Sea. This is no longer the case, and sea control is now contested and will remain so for the foreseeable future. This obviously shows that Russia is not as strong in the region as previously perceived.
In fact, all this is not just coming from us, because some countries have been smart and are already immersed in plans to replicate this Ukrainian success. Take a look.
Estonia prepares for introduction of maritime drones following Ukraine's example. Baltic Workboats, an Estonian shipbuilding company, is leading an international consortium to build a prototype sea drone for Europe. The result will show how many tasks can be given to an artificial sail.
With everything we're telling you, it is inevitable that Kyiv will be viewed as a more than possible supplier of low-cost weapons and technologies for European armies in the midst of rearmament. With military budgets growing by leaps and bounds in the old continent, Ukraine could receive huge amounts of money in technology orders and licenses, and this would be very good news for a country that is going to need investment, industry, and a lot of money to recover its economy. In fact, things have changed so much in the Ukrainian military industry that right now, supporting Kyiv is no longer just a gesture of solidarity, it's the best insurance policy Europe can take out. Because the same ecosystem that creates a $400 FPV drone and puts a robot stretcher bearer in the trenches in 3 days is precisely the innovation chain that Brussels needs for its own rearmament. And this is precisely what we're going to talk about next.
Made in Kyiv.
If Ukraine has managed to turn the emergency into a cutting-edge factory, wouldn't it be crazy to let that engine stop just when Europe is looking to armor itself? VisualPolitik community, open your eyes wide, because what you're seeing is, word for word, the plan that has just landed on the desks of capitals such as Tallinn, Riga, Vilnius, Helsinki, and Warsaw. The objective? To create a firewall against any provocation from hostile regimes. In other words, to armor the house before Moscow attempts a Donbass 2.0 move among the pines of Estonia or Latvia.
With the right political coordination, a first operational layer, using existing and proven technology, could be deployed within a year. The technology is ready. What's still needed is an EU or NATO-level strategy.
Now, where does Ukraine come into this picture? Well, everywhere. Because if this drone wall is to be in place before the end of the decade, Brussels needs two things that are not being sought in Washington and Shanghai right now. Millions of cheap platforms and an ecosystem that manufactures, upgrades, and replenishes them every month. Exactly what Kyiv has been doing since 2022, with a paltry budget compared to NATO. While US giants take years to certify a model that costs more than a Ferrari, Dnipro startups launch 3 new prototypes between one artillery shift and the next. Trial, error, patch, flight, and back to square one. That speed, fine-tuned under fire, is just the fuel needed for European rearmament. What's more, the Ukrainian military has developed a scoring system where units get points for successful missions and operational productivity. These points can then be used to purchase equipment, thus encouraging units to prioritize efficiency rather than other interests when requiring more weapons. The result? A Darwinian market where the useful survives and the expensive or useless dies. As we've already told you on VisualPolitik, Europe suffers from a chronic disease: fragmentation. Each capital cares for its national jewel, as if it were sacred legacy. More than a dozen tank models, more than 20 standard rifles, half a dozen different fighters, and a string of ammunition calibers. Contracts are chopped up to please domestic parliaments. Industrial compensation is doled out that duplicates redundant assembly lines, and schedules swell. Skyrocketing costs, mile-long lead times, and worst of all, scattered R&D, because every learning curve is locked behind administrative boundaries. Now imagine injecting into that system the Ukraine method, modular platforms that share motors, batteries, and controllers, open software that anyone can audit and patch, express tenders paid on success, not promise. VisualPolitik community, integrating Kyiv into the European chain could mean setting up a common laboratory that unifies first-line needs, standardizes components, and obliges to buy by continental lot, not by national ego. Because Lviv's workshop manufactures parts that they assemble without asking what country the chip comes from. The only thing that matters is that the drone flies tomorrow. This work-or-die culture would serve as a model for rationalizing catalogs, a single FPV drone for all armies, a logistics robot that uses the same battery in Riga and Seville, and a compatible data language from Tallinn to Lisbon. In short, and as ironic as it may sound, adding Ukraine is not enlarging the mosaic, but welding the cracks. One actor, out of sheer necessity, already manufactures as Europe says it wants to manufacture, but has never dared. And if the old continent really aspires to a wall of drones from the Baltic to the Adriatic, it had better be infected by this Ukrainian way of doing things that we have just told you about. The question is, will Brussels manage to overcome industrial pride and adopt the Ukrainian method of manufacturing first and discussing later? Or will we stumble back into the trenches of fragmentation? Is Ukraine the missing piece for Europe to finally build a common and affordable defense? I guess time will tell. But until then, what do you think? Will the Ukrainian drone line be the model that saves Europe's eastern border? Or Will it remain an experiment, impossible to copy? Can Russia break the swarm wall with its Starlink killer? Or will it only succeed in accelerating the next wave of made-in-Kyiv innovation? Has war changed forever? Leave us your opinions below in the comments and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you so much for being there. All the best. See you next time.